Hey guys, welcome back to the Lit Mag Lab podcast. I hope you all had a great holiday. And yeah, if you celebrated, and this is sort of the holiday season still, right? Christmas is coming up. It's December, So yeah, I'm just, wishing everyone, great holidays, upcoming too. Yeah. Just do these episodes when I can. Previously on the podcast, covered an update on Dapple, right? So I've been doing some Q&As with various submission management systems, the founders of them, so you can learn more about how they started, how they, can benefit, founding editors of lit magazine journals and presses. Also, I think, again, just reiterating this, but from a submitter side, I think it's important to know about the features and capabilities of the submission management systems, right? That, is intaking your submission, sort of the features on the back end that are available to founding editors, right? The messaging system, the rounds review that some of these systems offer. So give a listen back to that. The one on Dapple. Also last month, one Q&A went out with Subfolio. So make a pit stop over to the LitMag Lab Substack as well. And yeah, you can read those interviews, learn more about the founders and the features too there. Aside from, of course, you could always do a trial of any of the systems I mentioned in the podcast if you like. And, if you're an editor of a Litmer journal or, submitter, some of them, again, have discover pages. You can find more calls through them like Subfolio, right? And of course, right, DuoSumma has a discover opportunities page. And obviously, most are aware of Submittables discover page too. And Dapple, again, as we shared in that Q&A, right, they also have a sort of partnership, in terms of addressing, right, or discovering calls and things like that, right, of some kind that they're working on, or it's being facilitated, which is cool. So yeah, today is going to be a spotlight under the slide episode, which means I'm just going to dissect the site, look at submission guidelines a little bit further of a literary magazine, right? So today we're going to take a look at Faun by Moonlight. That is FAUNBYMOONLIGHT. And yeah, I don't know how many of you guys are aware of Faun by Moonlight, like what that actually is. I like learning about, the backstories or behind names and origins. So you can sort of see the painting, I guess, on their main screen, or like the, the graphic of it, behind on their website. It sort of, resembles it, but this is the actual painting. If we go on, I think I have it up here. If I scroll up here, so yeah, so I actually have it up here. Wikimedia, just commons. So this is a painting, I believe, from Leon Spiliart from the 1900s. So yeah, Faun by Moonlight is an actual artwork by, I think, a Belgian symbolist painter, Leon Spiliart. So yeah, it's sort of, I think, is known as being a rather, you could say, kind of creepy, eerie painting, but I think it's rather cool, right? You have the moonlight, and then, right, the fawn, right? You guys are aware of, like, half man, half goat, mythological figures, right? And it's sort of, you can see playing a woodwind instrument, right? If you're seeing my screen out on YouTube and elsewhere, right? I know not a bunch use Spotify as much anymore, is what I'm seeing. So, that's why I try to put these episodes out elsewhere, the video episodes. So can always watch it in more than one place. Yeah. So yeah, I think this artwork is really cool. In terms of fawns, guys, just sharing really quick, I like to just share some stuff. So personally, I think I've was always a fan, I think, of the first Chronicles of Narnia, and then the second one. Not so much like, I think they're also doing a reboot, but I don't know if I'll watch that. But yeah, Chronicles of Narnia, I think that had a fawn in it, right? And then one of my all-time favorite series in existence, right? Percy Jackson Olympian series, right, by Rick Riordan. There was a character named Grover Underwood, right? So yeah, I'm not sure how many of you guys are familiar with that, but yeah, Grover Underwood, yeah, and Chronicles of Narnia. There was I think, a fawn character, if I recall, and then I think, others sometimes confuse satyrs with fawns, right? Satyr, but they're actually different, I think. Very similar, but very different. So like satyr, I think, right, is like from Hercules, right? The Disney, wasn't that a Disney movie animation? So yeah, Hercules, Phil, right? The satyr in that animation was always memorable to me. And yeah, I think just some of my all-time favorite characters that sort of are in that sort of sense of, fawns and satyrs, right? They're different, but So look that up if you're interested. But I just wanted to mention that it is actually a painting and artwork, right? Pretty cool, And yeah, so that is sort of what's behind their name. So before we get going and dig around on their site here, I want to just check out their chill subs page here. So, I think I had seen Faun by Moonlight on social media or somewhere at some point in time. I can't remember if it was X or, formerly Twitter, right? Someplace, but, totally, while I've been doing this podcast, I had, editors reach out to me and discuss various things too. And yeah, it's been really awesome. So just know I can't read every single issue in existence, but I absolutely do try to check out and read issues when I can from time to time. And yeah, it absolutely means a lot to me to get feedback from others that the series is helping them, and yeah, that they do enjoy it or have learned something from it. I, as well, by doing the series, have learned a lot too, I must say, and it's pretty fun for me. So just trying to do these when I can. So this is a chill subs overview page again. I have an episode that talks about chill subs, or a couple episodes, and yeah, so they do have a recommendation here. It looks like bold and weird, hidden gem, new writer friendly. And yeah, there is, we'll get into the stats here a little bit, but they are a fairly new publication, right? I think they were just founded this year, right, in 2025, so they just started. So Fawn by Moonlight is based in London, UK, it looks like, and it's an online literary magazine dedicated to literary fiction. They publish works that resist simple genre classification, works that aren't scared of pushing boundaries, bending rules, but above all, being creative. Their speciality is the exceptionally unmarketable. Their mission is to present you, the reader, with literature that both challenges and exceeds your expectations. They launched their first volume in November 2025. Yeah, so literally just last month, right? They launched their first volume. And yeah, their second volume is up. So it says they have over 50 monthly readers. And I think they probably have more than that since, right? I think their second volume is actually up, I think I saw on the website, right? So the masthead, right? We have the editor Elias Grove, and yeah, so that's cool. We have that there, and yeah. So they do have a submission fee of $4.99, and yeah, we'll take a closer look at that. However, they do pay, it looks like, writers $50, which is cool. There are publications out there that pay writers for work and have no fees. So again, we'll take a closer look at the fee setup, or what that entails, really. Yeah, because every publication is a little bit different in terms of their structure, right? And yeah, so they have some calls here, right, that it looks like are always open or marked as that, right? So short stories, literary fiction. So it says they are always open and welcoming new submissions. Keep in mind, some things can change with publications over time, but I think it's nice that they're saying that. So yeah, there's actually a pay range showing 20 to $50. So yeah, for the short stories, literary fiction, they pay a flat rate of $20 for submissions under 5,000 words and $50 for over 5,000 words. So that's nice. And then it says the submission fee is essentially just purchasing one of their issues. So yeah, so when you purchase an issue, I think they most places they have a way to verify that, right? And yeah, and then that would be like you know your fee, and you also get the issue. So I'm not a fan of fees, and a lot of ours aren't. When I first started my lit mag, right, dippity, right, we had, first time is free, and then second time or more isn't, and then we dissolved fees in July at Dippy Lit Mag. But not every place can do that, and we didn't get rid of fees at Dippity Press, but that's something I would just prefer to have all fees dissolved. Obviously, it's hard, for a lot of publications out there. I know even some university publications out there too, they have fees implemented. And $5 isn't too bad. I think when it starts getting, 6, 8, 10, $20, that's way too high, right? So, yeah, totally. I know some submitters do, once in a blue moon, as I mentioned on a recent article, right? Starting a lit mag, or press, right? Or literary journal, or, magazine, a quick start guide I typed out, right? Yeah, you absolutely want to make sure, as a last resort, you implement fees. Make sure you've, done a community Patreon. Make sure you've tried, a fundraiser event of some kind, Some lit magazine journals totally have had, some success starting a fundraiser event, hitting their goal, and then using that to kick things off, or an ongoing Patreon that covers their operational expenses, right? Community support, right, is a great way to keep a publication up and running. Absolutely is hard and tough, but there are ways, to do even bonus content and to have that, through a Substack. Yeah, you can be creative, in ways to do that. It's been rather hard, I would say, over time with Lit Mag I ran, right, we sort of changed fee structures, second time or more had increased at some point in time, but then I got rid of all fees because I really didn't like it. And, it was just really hard. Whenever you have fees, I think, a lot of founding editors, right, themselves, right, they also try to avoid fees when they're maybe, maybe doing, publications themselves with their own work, submitting as themselves submitter side, right? And, it's hard though. It is hard to get to a point of zero fees, but it's possible. Yeah, anyways, so I think that's interesting. Mostly I see this, the whole thing with, submission fees. Normally contests, right, that's where I see, right, when you submit to a literary journal's contest, right, and let's say the fee's rather high, right, that's usually because there's a cash award, large cash award behind it. And in the price of that, right, along with paying that contest fee, like in the past I got like a 1 year subscription, right, to their issues, which is common, so yeah, I think, it's, you do get something, for your submission fee. They're giving you the issue, right? But we'll take a closer look at, the site in a little bit here. So they have a nonfiction call, right? And that one, it looks like it's $50, right? Again, the fee is $4.99. Yeah, so they have nonfiction submissions, and they're interested in essays, personal, lyrical, or critical essays exploring unique perspectives, historical pieces, well-researched narratives, snapshots of specific eras, or deep dives into obscure events. Yeah, so that's cool. On this podcast, I don't think we've covered, a place that particularly focuses on essays or historical pieces or anything of that nature. So I think that's really interesting. And yeah, so I have taken a peek into Faun by Moonlight's issues and, a little bit. And yeah, I haven't read all the way through. But yeah, I think it's a pretty unique publication. Let's dig in here. So they have their second volume here. You can see they have at the bottom of their site, they are a CLMP member. They're listed on Duotrope, Chill Subs, and the Submission Grinder. So that's nice that they have everything linked out there. I did head over to their CLMP page, and yeah, so it basically states, exactly similar things that we saw right on there. And yeah, so I think in terms of email, right, it's always a good idea to use a separate email for anything publicly displayed. So yeah, they do have a CLMP listing page here, right? And they are listed on Duotrope. You'll note here again, the project is new and has been listed with Duotrope for less than 6 months. Yeah, they just literally launched. So it's a fledgling listing. That's what they market as until it's, aged over time. So yeah, again, Duotrope's a great place to see everything summarized. Again, same thing with Chill Subs. Great ways to compare information before you submit. And aside from that, I always recommend reading the guidelines on the website, sticking to that. Yeah. So let's click in here. I think this is the enter button, right? And that's cool. It's displayed in different languages. So yeah. So this is their website, and so it takes you out to who they are, right? So again, I covered that already. Faun by Moonlight, the online literary magazine, right? So their second volume is out now, and let's click enter here. Yep, so that takes us out to the Who We Are page, and yeah, so I won't go through this again because I already covered it on the Chill Subs overview page. But we will take a look very soon here at the submissions page, for guidelines and things like that. Looks like they also have an AI statement. Yeah. So yeah, who we are, and then looks like they have a contact page. Yeah. So my one comment would be, in terms of this, like the contact and who we are page, I think it'd be nice if they had, the location over here too, and also the editor in chief's name right on the site as well, because I don't really see that here. Of course, right, in issues and things like that, names are visible and even on Chillsup's overview page. But I think it's nice to have that on the site. At a minimum, the editor's name, who's running it, and again, some editors, they go by their pen names. That's totally okay, and just their title and maybe a little bit about them. I think it's nice to get to know editors and to learn more about them, but for privacy purposes, totally, some editors, at a minimum, they put their name, their title, right, and where the publication is based. But I think it's nice, for some publications to have, photos or just some fun illustrations of the editor, even too. I've seen that too, or of the staff or team, behind it. Yeah, and everyone involved. I think it's nice to do that. It's always a good idea. I think when others don't see any names or who's running it, it's hard sometimes for submitters to they like to address, the editors like, hey, or, not hey in exactly that sense, but, in a cover letter or addressing the editor, right, by their name, right? I think a lot of submitters like to do that, or to learn more about who's behind the publication, right? Just think about it this way, if you have a business, right, or something like that, right, and there are no names of who's behind the business, right? Are you really going to feel comfortable interacting with that business if you don't know who's behind it? Obviously, right, we have like the editor's name here, right? Elias, and everything, the masthead, right? Name visible, and they're on CLMP, and listed in other areas. So, yeah, and I see the editor's name in other places, but I think on the website, it'd be nice for that to be really apparent for others, like visiting the website. They wouldn't be able to tell, unless they were to go on Chill Subs or elsewhere, right? So, or maybe even dig into the issues, right, itself. So, yeah, that'd be my only comment there on that. So let's take a look at the submissions page here, right? So yeah, it looks like they're now reading for their January 2026 issue. So that's cool. Yeah. And yeah, so they have a note here. So just quoting this, right? So at Faun by Moonlight, right? They have a warning note right here. They are willing to publish difficult and challenging themes. However, they are not publish nor consider anything that's really, graphic, right, in nature, right, at all. Or, yeah, nothing that's extremely violent or anything like that, right? Yeah. I think it's always important for publications to express that, things they absolutely will not, take and things like that, right? That's always good to see. So what they're looking for, they have an FAQ page. Yeah, let's head over to there. I've already sort of covered this, but again, it's always good to compare what you see on the website, against Chill Subs, and that always go with what's on the website, in terms of guidelines, because that's what the publisher's looking for. Sometimes it takes a while for editors to circle back to updating things on Chill Subs or even Duotrope, right? Is what we've seen right on this podcast, just going through some publications. So their FAQ page, right? Always good idea to have an FAQ page. That's great to see. So again, right, they have what is Faun by Moonlight. I think it'd be cool if they had, Faun by Moonlight and did a nod to the painter, right, Leon Spilliart here, right, just mentioning that it's an artwork, because I think some may not have searched that or may even know that it is actual artwork that exists, right, a painting. And that would be my only comment there. But nevertheless, great that they have, expandable, right, drop down FAQ page. I think that's nice. So where can you buy the magazine, right? So it says here you can buy their volumes directly from their store at Faun by Moonlight, that store, right? With the purchase, right, you receive a PDF, right? And it's a high quality EPUB, DRM free, subscription free, and ready to read anywhere. So yeah, I think it's a straight up digital PDF that you get. And so at this stage, they're a digital only magazine, and this says they are planning on moving on to print eventually. So yeah. What works are they looking for? So it says they look for stories that feature complex characters, trust the intelligence of the readers, and defy easy categorization. Unmarketable is their speciality. What is literary fiction? So for those of you unaware, I'm just going to quote this off their site. Literary fiction is a genre that prioritizes depth and complexity through character-driven narratives over any particular thematic focus. It has no defined format, storytelling device, or predetermined must-haves. However, this frees your work from specific genre constraints, not the need for a story. They're looking for works that tell a meaningful story. How you wish you tell that story is up to you. What genres will they consider? So again, their publications focuses on literary fiction. It says your story can contain elements of other genres, but these should only complement, not define it. Um, So it says they do accept nonfiction, right? But they are interested again in challenging works instead of purely speculative pieces. They don't need to be necessarily academic, but must be rigorous in their explorations of the topics they mention. They are particularly interested in politically charged works and those that may ruffle a few feathers. Although it says they are generally anti capitalist and left leaning in ideology, they are happy to see works from both sides of the aisle. So, yeah, before we go further here, I think, in their issues, when I was taking a peek in them, I haven't read all the way through the issue, but I have, taken a peek in the issues. So, yeah, again, something they reiterated right at the start of their issues, right? I think it was good that they did it, right? Is just to, a warning, right, on some themes and topics, right, that are on, the, you could say more sensitive side, right? Tied to politics, right? Some things, themes explored in their issues was political, violence, war, genocide, even topics covering racism, and things like that, death even, and, things of that nature. Yeah, and there were some other, warnings in advance on the issue, just, a heads up to others. I think it's important, again, for publications to have, warnings like that, trigger warnings, or, heads up, of the topics that they're covering. So I thought that was good. But yeah, and then I think they also mentioned, right, quoting this from the issue, right, that I'd seen, right. So the views and opinions, right, that are expressed in their publication, of individual authors, right, and contributors, it doesn't necessarily, reflect the views of Faun by Moonlight or the team of Faun by Moonlight, I believe, right. And yeah, I think the same thing could be said about, me, like if I were like covering a lit mag or journal and I haven't read their issues in full or entirety, right? Or something of that nature, or founding editors, views come out at a later time, right? That doesn't necessarily, or anything like as a founding editor myself, sometimes we are, right, providing a platform where others have, I think even newspapers in general is right. And when others are on a newspaper team, even, right, this comes up, right? Sometimes, there are pieces in a publication that not everyone sees eye to eye on, right? And that's the beauty of life, right? We don't have to agree on everything. Everyone has their thoughts, their values, their own opinions and beliefs. But yeah, with the publications I'm covering this podcast, right? Just because I, cover them or talk about them, it doesn't necessarily mean, I, share the same views with that publication or anything like that. I'm sure you guys know I'm all for, right, peace, harmony, and in general, right. I really wish wars didn't exist, right? It's just really heartbreaking, I think, especially the past couple of years, what has been going on, right, in the world. It's really heartbreaking. And yeah. Anyways, I think it's absolutely important that publications touch base on rather sensitive topics and things in the world, and really trying to get discussion around it, because it's important, right? I myself, just sharing, this is also an audio diary podcast. Sometimes I talk about things that publications remind me of. So I personally used to write, when I was much younger, tied to a lot of, college work, even high school work, middle school even, historical fiction, quite a bit. And also, I used to do, a lot of academic research papers and essays. I participated in National History Day a couple of times in middle school, which I really enjoyed, right? I did research around, right, the bubonic plague, right? Yeah, the beak doctors, and even the Dred Scott decision. So those were two things I really did heavy research on, when I was younger, and did some historical fiction pieces even for academic projects. And yeah, so absolutely, I think it absolutely is cool that publications focus on really, really topics that actually impact us today, even till today, right? Historical topics, current events, right? As I shared in this podcast, right? Even the Only Poems episode, right? And Rattle, right? They do current events, current news themes and subjects, right? And or writes challenges around that, right? Others pick out a current event, they do a write around it. I think it's important to focus on current events. We can communicate a lot of really great messages through our writing, or have discussions around some rather important topics in the world. And remembering history is so important, right? And historical works. Now, again, right, they can oftentimes create mixed reviews, right, and some rather, um, others are always going to have their likes and dislikes. So I think it's really hard, editors who run, especially lit magazine journals, they're more geared towards, things that are political in nature. It's always going to raise that some sort of, you know, uh, mixed reviews, right? Others are always going to have different opinions. Not every single person in the world is always going to see eye to eye when it comes to politics or, things in the world and stuff like that. Everyone has their different views, different perspectives. And yeah, so I think I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. So again, I haven't read the issues in full, but I have peeked in and combed through a little bit just at the start. So just wanted to talk a little bit about it because we haven't really covered any, lit magazine journals on this podcast to date. Aside now, that sort of are very much focused on essays and things like that. Sure, I think I shared, some other publications in the podcast. I think in terms of longer works and stuff like that. Was it towards the end of Only Poems episode? I think, right, Strange Pilgrims is a publication that's out there, right? Um, yeah, so I think episode 80, right, was Only Poems episode, and towards the end, I shared Strange Pilgrims. So yeah. Anyways, yeah, so I just wanted to talk a bit about that. So it's good to always have, warnings and to let others know what, your publication's about and the topics, right? And as they said, right, it's going to ruffle a few feathers, right? Works that mention things that are political in nature or tied to historical events. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, I think it's history is absolutely important, and to remember and reflect on things tied to that, totally, just in general. Yeah. So it says yeah, you're free to submit your work about representation. They do pay writers for the work, so I think that's awesome that they do pay writers for work. Again, just a reminder: $20 for pieces under 5,000 words, and $50 for pieces 5,000 words and above. Yeah, I think that's still something. I think that's pretty awesome that they're able to pay writers for work. And yeah, so they said they aim to increase these payments rates as their publication grows. So they have a year-round submission schedule, no reading periods. Yeah, so the Lit Mag and Journal I run, right? So yeah, typically we are open all year round. We had a holiday break and might be extending that a little bit, but I think it is nice when you have recurring windows because then others sort of can prepare in advance, and I've always really been a fan of recurring windows. I just never been able to do them myself just because of so many back-to-back things, personally that had come up. Also, team members had life events. So then it's like, it's hard. We do the best we can to, have as many calls open throughout the year, basically. Most publications do that, but I absolutely think it's nice to have recurring windows. But yeah, it's nice that they're open all year round. So how quickly do they respond to submissions? So it says fee-supported submissions receive responses within 2 weeks and include detailed personalized feedback. For free submissions, they says they are working through their current backlog but cannot guarantee a specific timeline at this time. So this is kind of, I think, I don't know, because we saw in Chill Subs and elsewhere, right? It says there's a $5 fee. So we'll have to see where the free submissions comes into play here, right, on their site. I think if someone were to see this, they might be confused. Like, how you can get free submissions? Is there a fee waiver, or was there a free submissions at some point, or what? I think that could be a bit confusing there. But we may find that why on other places on their site, about how to get a free submission, or if there are fee waivers, or if that was a one-time thing, or I don't know. We'll have to see. So their publication schedule, it says they publish monthly digital volumes featuring 2 to 3 short stories through their dedicated store. So yeah, again, they had their first release, I think, back in November of 2025. So again, they have a $5 submission fee, right? It says it helps them maintain quality review time for each submission, supports the ongoing operations. So for the submission fee, right, all fee-supported submissions receive priority consideration, detailed personalized feedback on your work, whether your piece is accepted or not. This feedback is crafted to help you understand their editorial perspective and strengthen your writing for future submissions. So yeah, I think that's nice that they're outright saying, yeah, we're going to give you feedback too on your work, whether it's accepted or not. I think over time, as a publication grows, that can be challenging to maintain that, additional personalized feedback, but absolutely think it's nice that they have that. I think it's easier to do that if you have a team or volunteer staff of some kind, to give feedback on each piece. But yeah, so I know some publications offer that as an additional separate thing, a option bucket where there's have a fee for getting additional feedback as a bonus. But I think it's nice. So, basically I think so with the fee, right? The issue, right? You're getting that, and on top of that, you're getting feedback. So they are giving something back for that fee. So yeah, not a lot of publications go out of their way to give feedback. So I think that's nice that they do that or take the time to do that. Yeah. So they do accept simultaneous submissions, and then again, they ask if your story is accepted elsewhere, just notify them immediately by email so they can withdraw it from consideration. So yeah, that's pretty typical. And what rights do you require when you publish with them, right? So yeah, it says what rights do they acquire when Faun by Moonlight publishes, right? So they have first year rights only, right? So again, that means, right, they have the right to publish your story for the first time in their magazine. After publication, they retain non-exclusive archival rights to keep the story accessible in their digital archives and back volumes, and all other rights remain with the author, the writer, and they're free to republish their work elsewhere after the exclusive period ends. So they do have an exclusive period, right? So they have a 3-month exclusive period following publication. During that time, your story cannot be republished elsewhere. After 3 months, you may submit or republish your work anywhere, while they, maintain their non-exclusive archive rights. So yeah, so I think that, some places do have that. We've covered it on the podcast, right? Some places we've seen, a month of exclusivity, 3 months. I've seen some places state 6 months of exclusivity. 3 months, it's not too bad. I'm not a huge fan of exclusivity, but I think more so I see that with presses and chapbook publications, that have exclusivity agreements, because while the work's under construction, right, and stuff like that, they don't want it, right, published anywhere else, right? So it's the first place others read it, right? But yeah, 3 months isn't bad at all. And yeah, so you just want to keep that in mind. I think whenever, after an excluded period happens, or whenever that, if a place has that or not, it's only appropriate to credit, right, the first place a piece appeared or was published in, either way, so yeah. But yeah, so they do have that 3-month exclusivity period, and yeah. So yeah, so let's go back to, you know, um, something that we had covered, right? I mentioned, right? So yeah, let's go back here. So this is the one thing that I think was kind of confusing for me. Like for free submissions, we are working through our current backlog. We cannot guarantee a specific timeline. So yeah, this was kind of confusing on how quickly respond to submissions, right? So free submissions, like I think it would be nice to specify where they have that, besides their fee supported submissions. Yeah, so I think if we go over here to, they have an urgent appeal section, and that essentially, I'm going to scroll past the images for you guys because they can be graphic. It is very hard to see some images, but absolutely important. Again, I think it's awesome that some lit mags and journals highlight charities, or give back to charities even. As we saw a couple episodes back, one lit mag was actually giving sales of off to, I think a Tributator's family, right? And yeah, some various causes too. Some lit mags and journals give a portion of the issue purchase and sales to, or they highlight a charity, on their site of some kind. So, Faun by Moonlight has a donate to the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, PCRF, highlighted on their site. And basically, it states here, I'm quoting this off their site. So, readers who send them proof of their donation are included in their Faun by Moonlight thanks section, and recognizing, them as part of the community that they chose to act, as well as a personal email from the editor in chief. Thank you for the contribution, and your donation, right? So if you donate 100 or more, I believe to PCRF, right, you get essentially 1 full year of free monthly volumes, free access to all planned future exclusive content. Again, your name in the thanks section of their issues, right? Personal thank you message. And then if you donate $200 or more to PCRF, right, and Faun by Moonlight will give you free line edits of your work, short story or novel, even if it's not published by them, a letter of recommendation for your future submissions to other magazines. So yeah, I don't know about the letter of recommendation for, future submissions to other magazines. Um, I don't really see anyone really asking for that in other lit magazine journals. However, I do think it's great that they offer like free line edits of others' work, short story novel, or they're looking to help others as much as possible. And then says if you donated but don't wish to be named, right, you can still enjoy the benefits above. So yeah, you know, um, yeah, so I think that was the one thing that was kind of, I don't know if this was a typo or what, or if it was something else. But for free submissions, they're working through their current backlog, but cannot guarantee a specific timeline at this time. So I don't know if that was tied at some point in time to their, you know, the giving back, to charity or donation, or what that entailed, having free submission of some kind at the time. Because it looks like right now, as it stands, they have a $5 fee, right? And yeah, and that gives you an issue purchase, and then they give you feedback on your work. So I don't know about this part here. That'd be my only comment here. That was kind of confusing a little bit. But yeah, some lit magazine journals again have, fee free windows. Some have, it where, you know uh, a window that's just a week or a month, right? So yeah, this was like the one thing that's kind of confusing for me. For free submissions, they were working through their current backlog, but cannot guarantee a specific time at this time. I don't know if this was a typo or old, because currently, right, it shows, right, $5 fee, right, is in place, and give you an issue and then feedback on whether, the work whether or not the work's accepted or not, right? Yeah. So yeah, sometimes lit magazine journals, they have fee free windows, or sometimes they have, I don't know if it was tied to their giving back, uh, highlighting that, cause, an organization, in place of the submission fee, or some lit magazine journals have fee waivers too, or different things you can do for fee waivers. Sometimes it entails writing a letter to get a fee waiver, but you know um some submission man systems have a fee waiver form, right, to I don't think Faun by Moonlight uses a submission management system of some kind, just email right at this time. But yeah, I think it's a bit tricky, you know, managing things like that via email. So yeah, any case, I think they have a very detailed FAQ page. That would be like my one thing that stood out to me that was kind of confusing, under how quickly do you respond to submissions, right? So I don't know what was tying back to the free submissions that they had offered. It may have been, I may have read it in a letter, or something, that they had done in place of submission fees or something like that. I don't know, at some point in time when they started. But yeah, let's go back to who we are. So again, I mentioned it'd be nice if we had a little bit more information on the editor, right? Of course, we know the editor's name, Elias, and that's great. It's elsewhere, and even through the issues and things like that. Yeah, I think it's just nice to see that visibly on the site, the location and everything, and yeah, the title, the masthead, and yeah, under the who we are section, that was the only thing here. And they do have an AI statement. I won't read through the AI statement for you, but yeah, I think it's great that they have an AI statement. However, my comment would be, I think this is a little bit on the lengthy side. It can be a bit long-winded, and I've been long-winded totally myself on this podcast, just trying to cover as much as possible. But I don't think submitters would take the time to read through all of this. Typically, some absolutely who are interested in submitting, or fans of the publication, they absolutely will read every single word, to make sure that they comply with everything, that the editor is looking for as much as possible. But I think this is a bit, I don't think it's necessary to have a letter on AI. And some editors do is, within 3 to 5 sentences, like, very short and straight to the point. Like, no, we don't accept AI, and yeah, we're looking for, work only created by humans, right? Yeah, so I think when you have long-winded late statements or very long letters like this, some submitters may try to find loopholes in your words, or they may be confused. Even it could cause confusion. So if we scroll all the way to the bottom of this, right? Um, so Um, I'll quote this off of their letter here. So they state here, ultimately, their goal is to explain to you, the writer, that if you have used AI to brainstorm, research, or edit your work, then they'd be happy to receive it. However, if you used it to generate it, then they are not. And they outlined that in the reasons below. So I don't think they necessarily needed to go into detail of, this whole AI statement letter. But I think it's nice that they took the time to explain, their thoughts behind AI, or what their thoughts about it, and yeah, a majority of lit magazine journals I know out there in existence, over 90% of them, friends, the community and stuff like that who run lit magazine journals, they absolutely do not accept AI. So I think my one comment here on the statement, it's really nice that they have a letter, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary to have this whole AI statement letter, because I don't necessarily think most submitters aren't going to read through word for word on it. I think it mostly they want to have an answer to a yes or no question, right? Do you accept AI work? Is the answer, no? Yeah. So no, we do not accept AI work. It should be created by you as a human being. I don't think it even should, mention, anything, you know, uh, else besides that, So in a guide I wrote, just how to start a lit mag or journal, I sort of link back to a new article I created, right? Things that are turnoffs for submitters and things like that, right? Or that others typically don't like to see from a publication. I think one of those being was very long-winded, submission guidelines or statements. It's really nice to have the FAQ submission guidelines there, but I don't think it's necessary to have this additional AI statement letter. I think at most they can be very straightforward and put that in a drop down right in the FAQ section. Do you accept AI work, and say, no, we do not. That's it. You don't necessarily need to go into a full on letter into it, but I think it's nice that they took the time to do that. Yeah, sure, certainly. I think some editors have shared elsewhere their thoughts on AI. I've seen even some writers community on their personal blogs and elsewhere, but I don't think it's necessary for the publication to go into that much detail on AI itself. Can be very straightforward in the FAQ section, a drop down, right? No, we do not accept AI work. They do have a Substack, and I think this is also on their Substack, right? The AI statement. So I don't think it's absolutely necessary to have it on their site itself. I think this is something that was also kind of confusing if someone had seen this, right, on Substack, right? So their AI statement, right, they have in the subtitle saying we are okay with it. But if you read further down, right, even on their website, it's saying no, they do not want to receive AI generated work, right? And yeah, so I think that should be taken out, because this, if someone had come across this, it would be very confusing, because they're, you read through the letter and then it's like, yeah, so it's yeah, so if you read all the way towards the end, right, they state, right, no, they do not want to receive any AI work, right? So I think that, obviously in the letter I read through it, and they said, yeah, it's hard to escape AI nowadays. A lot of content is being used, for AI training and stuff like that, and it's horrendous, right? And things like that. But yeah, so they go into some other things, right, on how they started and their submissions and some challenges they ran into. I think at some point in time they were featured through authors publish, or their publication, then they had a surge of submissions, and then they had a bunch of submissions to go through, and it was really challenging. I think that's where it comes in handy to have a submission management system. Absolutely. It's really nice to have a submission management system to track everything. Just through email can be really tough when you have a surge of submissions, come through. And yeah, I like submission management systems. Again, Subfolio, a couple other submission management systems that cover in this podcast. They have fairly reasonable plans, even discounts for CLMP members. Subfolio has like a $10 a month plan, and then a bump up from that would be $29 a month. And it's really nice, I think, to really keep track of everything and organize it. And you can also have, again, reminders on guidelines and calls, again, to really remind others, yeah, this is what we're looking for in this, and they don't have to go back and forth to the site. They can go into the submission area, see the reminders, look at the call, enter their information, and yeah, you can also have a nice checkbox, added in most submission management systems saying, I agree that I have not used AI, in the submission, things like that. Of course, right, you're taking others for their word. That's an agreement checkbox. For others, like an agreement checkbox is the equivalent to a signature. Some lit magazine journals out there totally will have you sign an agreement when it comes to payments or terms or exclusivity, right? To have that on record and file. I think that's what's nice about submission man systems. Anytime you want to have some sort of contractual agreement or things of that nature, you can attach that back. You can get a record of it. So yeah, um, that is it. I think this should just be like what they have. Basically, works that are generative AI should not be considered. I think the creative voice must be authentic yours. I think they should just leave it at that. Yeah, sure. I think some writers in the world, they maybe use some tools for grammar checking and things like that of that nature at most. But yeah, I think it can be very straightforward like this with their AI policy at most. I don't think they need that additional link out to the AI statement letter. And I think if someone were to see this on their Substack, this would be confusing, right? Where it states they're okay with it and then, goes into some other things. I think it's totally fine for editors to share, things that came up when they launched their Lit Matter journal or to share their journey. I think it's actually nice and refreshing to see that, editors are upfront about things that happened, things they ran into. Even on Faun by Moonlight social media, I think they even shared they had, again, mixed reviews on the issues and the content of it. And yeah, I think that's just like in the nature of like some publications that again have politically focused work or things tied to current events or things of the past. I think, it's always going to be, there are topics out there in the world that, are again sensitive and controversial. Everyone has their own opinions and thoughts. So yeah, it's tough. I think with every publication, in terms of pieces published and things like that. But I think there are, absolutely some things that I think we've seen in the lit mag world that, are eyebrow raising, right? And things like that totally have come up in the history of lit mags and journals. Some have even, it affected them so much that some, resorted to closure. So it is important to keep that in mind. It can be really hard and stressful running a publication, as an editor of a lit mag and journal. And yeah, it's not easy by any means. So, I think apps is important to make sure policies are very short and, as I mentioned in that article, right, keep it short and sweet, make sure it's very brief. So I think this is enough. AI will not be considered. The creative voice must be authentic yours. I think that's all they really need. And again, I think this should be like more so in the FAQ section, and then maybe just like the submit button. It directs them to that on one single page, maybe. You know, yeah, and yeah. So, again, I think it's their site layout, everything's easy to find, and clear. There were just a couple things I think that were kind of confusing that I pointed out, right? So again, to submit, right, they want you to, do the fee, right, $5, which entails buying their issues. I have seen some publications do this. Faun by Moonlight's not the only one. Again, I'm not a huge fan of fees, but you're getting the issue, and they're stating they will give you personalized feedback on your submission. I'm not sure what the feedback looks like myself or anything like that, but again, I peeked into their issues, and yeah, I think yeah, again, I haven't submitted to them or anything like that myself. I per se am today, nowadays, I predominantly have read, I think, lit magazine journals that have poetry and short stories and fiction. But absolutely, I've read, historical fiction over the years myself, and I absolutely think it's important that publications cover, you know, um, yeah, essays, historical pieces, and things like that. There are absolutely some tough topics out there, I think that are, again, rather controversial that others are going to have mixed views on, and it's hard. So yeah, so it says they will match your submission to your payment using your email address, right? So again, I think that can be hard to kind of track and everything, when you're dealing with hundreds or thousands of submissions at some point in time. So I think it's really nice, to again leverage a submission man system of some kind. And the nice thing about submission man systems, like Sofolio or Dapple or some other ones out there, Dual Sumo, right? There are, tip sections, optional tip sections too. And others, like through Sofolio, others can change their tip and things like that. Um, so again, not a huge fan of fees, but it's they're asking for $5. The issue's $5. You're getting to see the issue. The one thing I will say about this, on their site, if we go to, and I will go back to this, but you can see they have a checkbox and stuff here. We'll come back to this in a little bit. So they have their volumes, right? Volume one and two. Yeah, so the thing I would see here, right? So they have opinion pieces, right, that are available to read, but I don't see any. I think it'd be nice to see a little bit more in terms of issue samples, like clearly stating that, like this is from our issue, this is from our volume, like more free pieces for others to read. Just a little bit from more from back issues that others can see, what some lit mags and journals do, right? Like I shared with Waffle Fried Lit Mag, right? Um, they had samples, right? Or rather, they had pieces from their issues available completely online too. Or what some lit mags do, right? Even 32 poems, right? As shared in one of the articles I typed, right? They have back issues available, just two pieces at least from each issue. And then they have every piece listed out, right, on their page, but only two are like free to read and accessible. And the others can purchase the issue, right, if they choose to. So I think it'd be nice to see more samples and stuff. Of course, they're stating, right, when you have the submission fee, you get the issue, right, sent to you. They also, give personalized feedback with, your submission, right, once they've reviewed it. But yeah, they have meet their authors, right, and things like that, right, and the bio. So, it's not absolutely necessary to have any photographs, I think, of poets and writers. Not everyone's comfortable giving a photograph to, is what I've seen. But what some publications have done, they use other photos in place, like maybe a preferred pet photograph or something like that. They do have the bios, the name of the writers, and that's great. So they have featured authors here, and that listed out. They even have reader reviews, so I think it's nice to have see feedback here, right? So, some have commented, right, that they don't have it on their EPUBs aren't available on Kindle or anything like that, but it's available for other devices, right? Yeah, so some have said their issues are awesome and that they absolutely loved it. So yeah, it's everyone I think has their different preference in terms of reading issues. So, yeah, it's tough. I think, when you have digital issues and they're a straight up PDF, and if it's fairly long, right, like, 70, 80 pages or anything like 100, right? It's more of a scroll read, right? And it's going to be rather tough for some, right? Totally. And yeah, so I think that's what's really nice about submission management systems. Again, you can attach, a contractual agreement back. You can have reminders. You can even put in like the acceptance or decision letters. Um, you know, uh, Set up a template saying, "Hey, don't forget to subscribe to our Substack. Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel. In the decision letters, stay in touch with us. Check out future calls. Yeah, so." I don't see anything about, how long others have to wait, until they try again, for a call or anything like that. I know some places after you receive a decision, they're like, you can submit again in 3 months, or, or how long you have to wait until, let's say you have work accepted, right? Can you submit again to the next issue or call? you know at the Litmag, or journal I run, right, we didn't really have anything like that. We let others partake in the calls as much as they wanted to. However, with the press, right, it's only right fair to not right do that back to back, right? So just make sure that others wait a year at least for, like, in terms of chapbooks and stuff like that. But I think a lot of publications, they totally sometimes have regular contributors and those who partake in issues across the years. Totally, that's a thing. But so I didn't see that in their FAQ in terms of, like, how often others can submit. Can they submit as much as they want, partake in each volume if they wish to, submit work to it and have it undergo review, or do they have to wait after getting acceptance again, before they can submit again to future calls? And after decline, can they try right again right away, or should they wait, a month, or 3 months, or how long? So that's the only thing, and yeah, so just some comments there, but yeah, I think their FAQ page is pretty clear. If we go back to who we are, right, they have a submissions page. Yeah, again, and yeah, so they reiterate again the nonfiction submissions, right? what they're looking for. Essays, right? Personal, lyrical, or critical essays exploring unique perspectives. Historical pieces, well researched narratives, snapshots of specific eras, or deep dives into obscure events. Payment for nonfiction is the same as their fiction rates. Manuscript requirements. So they do have their formatting requirements here, right? Standard manuscript format, double space, 12 point times New Roman or similar serif font, 1 inch margins, length up to 10,000 words, file type, right? Microsoft Word doc only. Simultaneous submissions accepted. Yeah, please notify them if your work's been accepted elsewhere, right? Previously published is not accepted. So yeah, again, I think this would be good to, have in their FAQ section, this portion, or I think actually this could be, you know, it'd be nice if they had this all in their FAQ section predominantly, and then just a submit button, on the FAQ page somewhere. I don't know. That's just my thought, but I think it's great that they have the format and the guidelines there. I think when you're doing submissions, and taking them through an email address, it's kind of tough because others could, of course, submit other file types to you. The nice thing about submission man systems is that you can restrict what file types you have, right? Submitted to you. So it says keep your cover letter brief, right? You can include a synopsis, brief introduction, but it's optional. They prefer to let the work speak for itself. So again, they have their AI policy here. So I think bite size here. I don't think the additional AI's letter statement or even on their Substack was absolutely necessary. But I think it's fine to share like additional things and bonus thoughts, an editor has on their Substack. I've seen, we've shared like Taco Bell Quarterly shared, some things like, running a lit mag or journal and the cost of it, right, that they faced and the publication, right. And yeah, I think on social media, I think I saw again, they had mentioned they got mixed feedback and reviews from some authors or, contributors and things like that. So, yeah, or others who read it. Yeah, it's again they are, doing pieces around some, events in time and history and things like that. And yeah, even some magazine journals I see that do current event pieces and things of that nature. There are, oftentimes everyone has mixed reviews and comments about it. So, again, it's tough, So I think whenever you have like, I think I saw some of their issues were, the ones this far, right, 30 something pages, under 40, and then another issue was slightly under 80 pages. So I think it's a good idea to be consistent in page counts and issues. Struggled with that with my own lit mag at first. One of our issues ended up being like fairly short compared to others. That's just because some things had come up and unexpectedly, and yeah, so for the most part, you should have consistent page count and things like that. But it can be hard, I think, when you're dealing with some, longer works and pieces, which, tend to be longer in length and stuff. But I think for the most part, it should be, most part, pretty close each issue, like the structure of it, right? The layout. And yeah, anytime, you have longer works that you're reading through, something I like to see is like artwork, or breaks in between those sections or pieces, just like to give others time to, take a break from reading text, right, back to back to back. I think it's nice to do that. But yeah, you know um uh, in terms of the PDF, right, that they have, right, so again, they have some different comments here. And I would say I'd recommend, listening back to, episode 33 of this podcast. It's where I cover, various PDF readers and things like that, right? And yeah, most of those do have an additional fee, there are additional costs with things like that. But it's not all of them in existence in terms of, there are some magazine subscription platforms out there that have to vet your publication, and then they, take a percentage of, your subscription sales and stuff, right? But yeah, most part, quite a few platforms that I've come into contact with, uh, you know, some will say, oh, your subject matter is not, we don't think it'll be popular among our audience, or they'll say no. But absolutely, there's some out there, I think, that, totally may onboard some publications. Absolutely, it all depends. It's hard to gauge that. But yeah, there are totally some really stellar though PDF flipbook readers, that enhance the reader experience. So it's a flipbook type format that others can flip through, right? And it gets put in a digital library. Others can read it and put comments on it and things like that. So I think those are really nice. I discussed a couple of those on the podcast, right? And episode 33, some of them I've mentioned, a couple other ones on this podcast, flipbook reader platforms, and you can do like embeds, or others can read it in the library and stuff. Obviously, again, there's usually most of those platforms have a monthly fee of some kind, but I think it helps, instead of scrolling through a chunky PDF, right? There are some out there that do have mobile app reader capabilities too. I know some publications have gone as far as, when they grew, creating their own mobile reader app, as I share in the podcast. Not everyone's able to do that, absolutely. So I think there are a lot of really great, PDF reader systems, flipbook, systems out there that, are very nice, for others to read and things like that. So yeah, just a thought. Yeah, so again, they featured authors. It looks like they put two featured authors' names on the issue here. So, but they have a wide array of contributors in the issues, itself. So I think it'd be nice if they had maybe in the description section, maybe all contributors listed, not just featuring works of two. The only reason, with my own Lit Manga journal, when I had started, putting not every single one's name in the description, was because some of the online distributors, right, or the print distributors rather, they had some weird things about characters and names. And it would like detect it as like a personal address or something of that nature. And so that's why I ended up not including everyone's name in just the description section. But of course, some publications, they include everyone's name, when they get in a print and things like that on the back of the covers. Or of course, it's in the interior of Faun by Moonlight, right? Totally. Everyone in it. But I think it'd be nice description to have everyone's name listed out, and even the page count, yeah. And again, they have a warning here, contains mature themes, right? And they have, again, good warnings, in advance on their issues too, again. Yeah. So there are, you could say editor letters, right, at the start and things like that. I don't think it's absolutely necessary, in issues itself to, discuss submission fees and things about AI essentially in the issues itself. I think more so it should focus on, why the theme was chosen, some of the themes I think that they have, right, are, erasure was one, and tyranny of the narrative. And yeah. So yeah, I think editor letters, typically all editors have some sort of letter addressing the issue, what it's about, and things like that. But I don't think it's necessary to really go into, mentioning submission fees and things of that nature, AI, statements again, or anything like that. Just a thought. But yeah, their issues are, organized, it's straightforward. I think it'd be nice if, any times I see issues of a lot of text or a lot of back-to-back pieces that, could be essays or, things like that. I typically am a very visual person, so I like to see a little bit more artwork, break up things, or, some lit magazine journals hold calls for artwork and things like that. Obviously, something Found by Moonlight has, obviously stated, and many other lit magazine journals have mentioned, is that, there's been an increase in AI submissions, and it's really hard to detect that, right? Obviously, there are tools out there that, some lit magazine journals use to try to scan and analyze things for plagiarism, AI content, or anything like that to catch it. Those tools are not 100% perfect at all. They're not 100% perfect. So, of course, as we mentioned in this podcast, even some of the interviews I've done with some founders of systems, right? They're like, absolutely, it helps to have community-driven effort, community identification of known plagiarists, of known submitters who are, just spamming, right, some lit magazine journals with work that isn't theirs, essentially, and bombarding them with it, or sending irrelevant pieces. I think submission man systems are important to have, of course, there are additional costs, and, some absolutely feel they're a waste of money, but I think there is a lot of value in centralizing everything and communicating with your team in one place as much as possible, and to keep tabs on everything, you know. I think just through email, you know, having thousands of emails, hundreds even over time, it's not really suitable. And even email systems have storage plans, right, and things like that. So there's eventually, you know, some storage, you know, is reached, and especially if you want to go back and do print issues or anthologies of some kind, you know, it's hard. Storage capacity fees and stuff like that. It happens to people too, you know. So I think submission man systems, there are some fairly, you know, reasonably priced ones on this podcast I covered, right? Subfolio and other ones out there, right, to look at and dapple. But yeah, you know, to introduce more artwork into publications, totally, you know, some lit magazine journals just hold open calls for them or take donations, you know. And yeah, I think it's cool, you know, too. Um, you know, uh, Again, Faun by Moonlight, you know, mentions, right, they, you know, share in their issues in advance, right, and warnings and things like that is absolutely important. I think they do a good job of, you know, discussing content warnings and stuff like that, and the graphic nature of it. You know, there's some lit magazine journals that you could say go more into that sense of those topics and themes, right, than others, rather sensitive in nature. And you know, the publication I run, you know, Dippity, right? We're not like politically focused or on current events or anything like that. Not to say, you know, we're not open that at all. We totally have from time to time received some current event submissions, right, or revolved around that, but they didn't fit the call at the time, right? Sometimes we have theme calls or things like that nature. You know, so yeah. Anyways, so that's Faun by Moonlight. You know, they have meet the authors, you know, read it. So I think I would just like to see a little bit more beyond the opinion piece, a little bit more samples from back issues on their site and things like that. I think if others were to just stumble across this, they wouldn't really get a sense of feel of the work, you know, that is published besides the opinion pieces and things like that. I think it would really be beneficial for them to have more samples of issues of their volumes and things of that nature to get a sense of, you know, just the nature sense, you know, of course, of warnings again, of any sensitive things, and then maybe a sample piece again, right? Yeah, just some more examples others could read, you know, and to get a feel of the publication a little bit further. And again, you know, maybe just sharing a little bit behind who's behind the publication, the editor's name here, the location, you know, their title at most, you know, at a minimum, because that's visible elsewhere, it looks like, totally. So that's the only thing. And yeah, you know, it's great they have a contact section. They're, you know, really striving to, you know, raise awareness. You know, I think it's great, you know, highlighting an organization, a charity. You know, some lit magazine journals totally do that. And then yeah, you know, just their FAQ page again, I think, you know, this was the thing that was just confusing for me, this bottom line on for free submission. So I didn't know again what that really entailed. It may have been, I may have read that somewhere and specifying their letter, how they started and stuff, or in terms of you know, how their launch of their first issue and things that led up to that, right? So I don't know if that would be taken out, or you know, a note here on what that really entailed. But yeah, it looks like their submission fee is $5 and they get an issue and personalized feedback. I think over time it becomes harder and harder to do feedback for every single submission, you know, so it's nice to have, you know, I don't know if they have, roll build out a reading team or share, you know, reading team names or down the road. But I think it's nice to be very transparent on the whole staff, everyone involved. And yeah, of course, for personal privacy reasons, right? You know, at most, I think some editors use a pen name or, you know, share a little bit about themselves or why they started the publication, or maybe the name behind it, the mission statement. You know, I think it's nice to do that. Yeah. Just, you know, some submitters like to learn more about the editor, the publication's origin story. You know, when did they start it? Why did they start it? You know, what's the mission statement all collectively there? You know, who's behind it? You know, I think it'd be nice to have that all umbrellaed under there. And some things I think under submit work could totally be maybe all pivoted under one page tied to the FAQ. But I think it's nice that they have, you know, what they're looking for right here, you know, and maybe it'd be nice to have some sample publications underneath this, what we're looking for, linked out here. I think having these sections are good, you know, submit work and FAQ. I think, you know, it's just a good idea to reiterate maybe the AI policy they have and some of these things in FAQ again. But yeah, you know, it's very organized, it's straightforward. You know, others have a checkbox, right, where, you know, they purchase an issue, right, and then they reveal the submission email. Now, I don't know if the submission email is this. I'm not going to state it here, but they do have a submission, a visible email on CLMP, and I think it's a good idea when you're, have some listings, up, in some search databases and things like that, where it has a contact email required or something. It's a good idea to have that email separate from a submissions email. For general questions, I think that's good to have. Some the magazine journals have a separate email for taking general questions and things of that nature, or some have a Discord channel, right, that others can hop into and things like that too, and ask questions. So again, they aim to respond all submission in 2 weeks. That's fairly quick, not bad at all. And yeah, so it says you can feel free to query if you haven't heard back. So yeah, I think that's what's nice about, again, submission man system. You don't really have to deal with others, sending off to an email to you. It's all intaked into the submission man system. You get reminders on submissions and everything like that, right? And yeah, most are familiar with Submittable, right? And CLMP has a membership discount on that. Sure, Submittable to date is used widely by a lot of publications, and there's fairly a lot of traffic through their submission, discovery page. But this year, especially, three submission man systems have launched, right? Subfolio, Dapple, and Ola, just reiterating this. So they have fairly reasonable plans, across the board. I think it's just really nice. And I think, again, it's really going to be interesting to see, them evolve and grow over the years. Absolutely. I think, yeah, every lit journal has a different submission process. But I think as a publication grows over time, it's really hard to do that. So yeah, some submission man systems, right? Portfolio have some great features tied to that, and the various options, and handling payments and things like that, or transactions between, that come through, in submission man systems. Some lit magazine journals, they facilitate subscriptions through Submittable and stuff like that, and I guess the same thing could be done in a sense through, Subfolio and some other submission man systems, structuring it in a way, yeah. So yeah, I think it is hard, to juggle things via email, and yeah, starting off, it's not absolutely necessary, just getting a feel for the waters to have a submission management system. But I think it's important to, if you start noticing a surge in submissions, a surge in volume, and it's becoming really tough to manage all of that through, let's say email or Google Forms, right? I think it's best to find a new system or one out there. There are some free platforms out there, absolutely, but I think some are dissolving, right, this year, especially, right, that I mentioned this podcast, right. Oleada is no longer, so now Ola exists, right, and they have a different structure. It's fairly reasonable, still not too bad, the plans they have, for calls and setting up an account, and trials of these. So I'd maybe recommend anyone using email to manage submissions to look at some of the new submission management systems that have launched, because they have some fairly reasonable plans, very low cost ones, very cost friendly, budget friendly, for lit magazine journals, Subfolio, Dapple, and Ola again. So just mentioning that, because again, I am doing some Q&As upcoming. Some of my time's allocated there, with these submission management systems, to get an inside look at them, to learn about the benefits of them, how they started, um, sure, I know some founding editors out there totally are like, absolutely will never use a submission management system ever in my life. I prefer just to do everything via email. I don't see the point of having coughing up more money for submission management system. But think about it this way: you want to give submitters, again, a great experience, with your, publication, submitting, keeping track of any messages, questions they have centrally, all of that tied to the submission, the status of it, all of that, right? I think it's good to have all of that organized as much as possible, right? Instead of going through like a needle of a haystack, trying to remember where things are. You can keep tabs on your assignments. And if you have a team, one day you can have, assess their assignments as well, monitor things, all of that, keep tabs on everything. So yeah, that's Faun by Moonlight. Again, I'm not a huge fan of, fees. I try to, throughout, the start of my own lit magazine journal, where I tried to eliminate fees altogether, gradually got to that point. But it's really hard. It takes some lit magazine journals a while to eliminate fees, or it takes different structures, right, to really get to that point. Not every lit magazine journal is able to establish funding, or not everyone, wants to become a nonprofit. I don't run a nonprofit. There are, again, risk associated penalties, very hefty, with running a nonprofit, if you don't follow compliance regularly. So, totally, I think it helps to have a Patreon. That's something I may look into one day myself a little bit further. I tried initially, but didn't really get it going up and running as long as possible. And there are various things like buy me a coffee, right? A lot of publications have that, obviously, but I think it's nice that, again, they offer additional personalized feedback and you get a copy of the issue. But I think it'd be nice, really nice, to have publicly available samples of issues and everything like that. Something I didn't see mentioned is I think the whole aspect of nominating for any events in existence, in terms of the literary art space, or anything like that. And I think some of those events, absolutely right, they need to be able to, they have some things about, in their terms of like, if you nominate work, links that, need to be accessible, or how to get others access to view those issues, right, to be able to, read the nominated pieces and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't see anything about them nominating work to date for any of the nomination events and things like that, but they do pay writers for work, it looks like, so I think that's cool, yeah. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. 20 to $50 is their pay range, it looks like, again, $20 for stories under 5,000, $50 for stories 5,000 plus words, right, paid upon acceptance. So yeah, that's pretty much it on Fawn by Moonlight. I think I pretty much covered everything. Sometimes lit magazine journals, change their response time over time, or their call windows, as things change, or they notice a different level of traffic in the submissions. So, just keep that in mind. Sometimes things change. And yeah, some founding editors totally have listened to some of the episodes I've done. Podcasts have, made adjustments to some things on their site or guidelines, or, said it helped them, or thought my feedback was interesting. So, yeah, this podcast is all about just like, predominantly, most of the spotlight episodes, I really try to cover, things, pointing things out on the site, things to mention, or things that I think of, mostly. I haven't read every single issue in existence of every lit mag journal. Absolutely would love to, but it's really hard to do so. But I do absolutely try to peek into issues to see things as much as possible. Obviously, again, anything that's historical in nature, political in nature, right? Not everyone's going to see eye to eye to it, or anything like that. I'm not a huge on politics myself or anything like that. Sure, I keep in the loop on current events and news, and yeah, I would say one of my all-time favorite classes in school, was, aside from science and art, right, was history, right? I did fairly well in history classes for quite some time. I really loved, I used to do this thing, I think I mentioned on the podcast, where we'd have like, an extra credit assignment or something available, and I would do these cartoon panels, essentially, like of like historical events, and comic panels, essentially, and on one of those, long, not the foldable, science boards, but one of those long pieces, slabs of one of those boards you can use for displays, right? A long display board, usually black, right? And I'd put, I would draw on the back of, blank flashcards, like jumbo size ones, and do comic panels with them. And it was just a lot of fun, to do historical events like that, to highlight them in that manner. Because I'm just a visual person, but, yeah. So, anyways, those are just like, some additional shares, myself. But I think it's quite fascinating, to come across publications like Faun by Moonlight, that focus on, essays, pieces that, have personal, lyrical, critical essays, different perspectives, and really, take things, towards that direction of like really considering different perspectives, and assessing things, I think it's important to reflect back on things, tied to history, things that actually happened, in the world, because they're absolutely important, right, to remember those events and things like that. And yeah, it's absolutely important. Some people may say totally, maybe they've slept through history class, but I think I was always someone who always tried to really pay attention to everything, as much as possible. Um, you know, um, a lot of things exist because of some things that happened back in the past, historical events, some things tied to historical events are still impacting us to this very day, and it's so important, I think, to highlight that, and to, see everyone's perspectives on that and things like that. Again, I think Fawn by Moonlight had some rather, controversial mixed reviews on their, issues and things of that nature, so That's all I would say. Again, everyone's, when they read the piece, it doesn't matter if it's poetry or not, or essays or nonfiction or anything like that. Even, when someone reads a poem or anything like that, everyone has mixed thoughts or opinions on what it means to them, or the meaning behind it, or what it's referring to. I think, essays, longer works, historical pieces, some writers in the world, some readers, audiences absolutely love that. They absolutely read that quite heavily, historical pieces, essays, and longer pieces, right? So it's really, I think, again, their publications just goes to show you, out there for everyone. If you're someone who likes historical pieces, things of that nature, right? Nonfiction submissions, and things of that nature, yeah. Again, you know, um, they have, again, there are publications out there. So yeah, again, literary fiction, there are publications out there. I think it just goes to show you, out there for everyone, in terms of, things that others, are more inclined to read or write about. There are totally some writers in the community I know that do love writing, things that are geared, towards politics or historical events, or things that actually happened in the past. And absolutely, there are, writers out there in the world that, do, character driven narratives, things of that nature, but tell, a meaningful story. But again, I think it's always going to be, as I mentioned, sensitive topics, things like that, politics and things, very controversial, sensitive topics, right? Where not everyone's going to see eye to eye, you know so it's tough. I think publications like Faun by Moonlight and other ones out there, always, as I mentioned in the podcast, being a challenge, some of the challenges with being a founding editor of a literary journal, you're always going to get mixed reviews or feedback on some issues and things like that. I think at some point in time, some of the publications out there, whether they be online, print, or not, as they grew and grew and grew, they got feedback from different writers. I've seen even in comment sections online, some comments some lit magazine journalists have gotten, about their publication and things like that. Some rather, harsh, nasty comments too. So, it can be tough, being a founding editor itself, and things like that. So, they don't have print right now, Fun by Moonlight, and yeah, so they have digital issues. My one main comment would be, I think it can be hard to read longer issues like that, scroll through them, but they do have, EPUB files that give out and PDFs, right? But I think it'd be nice to maybe one day see it in a flip book format, or some of the flip book style reader, platforms out there, that I mentioned maybe on the podcast. I think it was, right. Again, just reiterating this episode 33. And totally, I can be long winded on the podcast, but I just like to point things out as much as possible. This was definitely a longer episode. But yeah, again, I don't think it's really necessary to have that additional AI statement letter, as I mentioned, and things like that, or even on their Substack. I think this should be, removed, because I think it would be confusing if someone came across that and didn't read through the letter all the way, entirely, or maybe didn't see on their site, that and the AI policy. I think it should just be, strictly, again, on what's on their submissions page. I think this is enough, just stating, works, what it should state, right? Works that, have been used. I think it should just state, right, outright, again, works that have AI should not be, will not be considered. I think, again, it should just outright state, right, works that have, leveraged AI will not be considered, right? Just straightforward, right? The creative voice must be authentically yours by a human being. I think that just to the point. I don't think it really, needs to have anything else there. And the additional AI statement letter, even on Substack, I think that could be confusing if someone came across that. Again, it's totally fine for founding editors to share their thoughts, their feedback. I really love reading about the journeys, the challenges they had, with launching the issues, the submission surge and stuff that they had. And it seems like they've developed a reader base that some absolutely do love their issues to date. Some have had, given mixed reviews and feedback, and it happens, publications. So I just wanted to, share this because I'd come across it, and I think they have a very interesting publication. Yeah, off the top of my head, I can't name a bunch of places that, focus on historical pieces, essays, nonfiction submissions, things like that. So, again, it just goes to show you there's a publication out there. If there's a subject matter or topic you're interested in, there's bound to be one out there that focuses on it. So yeah, yeah, so again, they're on submission grinder and things like that, right? And yeah, again, they have a fee. So, you know, um, some places change over time, their fee structures, devolve fees, or have fee free windows, for maybe a week. I've seen some lit magazine journals and things like that. So, some places change, over time. And again, Faun by Moonlight said, they hope to increase their payments to writers. I think it's really awesome that they're able to pay writers for their work. I think, again, there aren't like thousands of places out there that are able to do that. So that's really cool. That's not too bad at all. $20, right? They have a range of $20 to $50 for, their calls overall. And yeah, so, I think, they mentioned, some interesting things in their, Substack AI statements and stuff. But again, I don't think it's really necessary to go into that level of depth in terms of the AI. I think it's important to be very straightforward and clear when it comes to an AI policy, very brief, at most 5 sentences, 3 to 5 sentences, doesn't need to be that long. Writers will typically find loopholes again in your words or things like that, when you have very long letters or things like that, or they may be confused, by some things. So yeah, those would be my only, comments there. I think it'd be just 2 sentences even. We don't accept AI. I've seen some lit magazine journals just state one thing like that. Any AI submission, will be declined. Obviously, it's hard for publications to catch AI generated submissions and things like that, but there are some tools, analysis tools. I know some founding editors are out there using or have monthly fees that they do. Things like that, right? And they're not perfect at all. Some magazine journals still again see things that they catch later on that are AI or plagiarized, and they have to tug that out. It's messy cleanup work for them, so it's really not cool, for others to do that. But it happens in the publication world nowadays more than ever with advancing technology, right? It's tough. So yeah, that's Fun by Moonlight. Totally check them out. I think it's cool, interesting publication. I haven't read all the way through their issues again, but I did peek in a little bit. I think again, it's really important that publications like this, which they do a good job of, is have warnings everywhere, on content, graphic material, anything like that. I think it'd be nice, maybe if Fun by Moonlight maybe incorporates, I don't know, some more, graphics to break up, back to back text, or pieces, essays, pieces, all of that, back to back to back. Cause I think that can be a little, it's nice to have some breaks in between, some sections and things like that. Obviously, that changes the length of the publication, but I think it's important for publication in general to have consistent formatting and page counts and length, and be nice to see, when others are purchasing the issue, right? What's the page count? How many, who are all the contributors, right, in the description of it, if possible, to list them out there, aside from the two featured authors. Yeah, or a majority of the contributors at least. I think it's nice to have more names highlighted in there, just so others get a sense of how much maybe is in the issue, maybe some of the pieces listed out, the authors, or, I think it'd be nice to see more samples of the issue besides the opinion pieces a little bit more. They just started. So again, some limited journals, I've seen they launched the first 2, 3 pieces or issues. I mean, they launch the first 2, 3 issues, then they start sharing more samples from online. They put warnings at the top of each piece, as needed. And yeah, so the layout is very organized on their site. I like the drop down of the FAQ page. I think some things could be reiterated that was on submit work also in the FAQ section, just in case someone misses that. But yeah, again, I think over time, it can be tough, managing things via email, but that's just a comment from me. Just, I think every editor has different thoughts on that. I know some editors created their own submission management system, platform, or portal too, as one as far as that for juggling things. But, there are intake form systems too, but I think I personally am a fan of some submission management systems out there like Sofolio. But yeah, again, I'm not huge on, I would say historical, writing to date myself, but I absolutely was much more so when I was younger and really doing a lot of academic papers, research work, and stuff like that. Nowadays, I've done a lot of more so short form pieces and stuff of that nature myself. But I know there are absolutely some writers, some friends I have in the community that absolutely love, historical fiction and historical nonfiction even, and stuff like that. So, if you're someone who's, interested in literary fiction and, historical pieces and things of that nature, things tied to history and events and, things that challenge perspectives, yeah, check out Faun by Moonlight, and give it a look, see if it interests you. It looks like they are preparing for another issue volume, right? January 2026. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. I think it's always a good idea for publications to outright also put an FAQ page. You can see they have different languages appearing on their screen and stuff like that, and enter and stuff. But I think the FAQ page is also nice to have. Clearly, whether a place accepts international submissions or not, things like that. So that's my only comments. I covered a lot on this podcast because there was a lot to discuss, just to talk about. Additionally, but I hope it helped you. And yeah, so again, on this podcast, I just try to talk about different publications I come across, things that stand out to me. Predominantly in the spotlight episodes, I talk about like guidelines, website layout, things to keep in mind, if you're going to start your own lit mag journal, or things to consider about your own. So I think absolutely it's necessary to have, again, an FAQ page, submit work section like they do. Whether or not you implement fees, right? I think as a last resort, do that, right? As always. It can be really hard to not implement fees because costs can rack up really quick with any publication, especially when you dive into print. You take on to more expenses, and even if you start dabbling in, some other platforms or systems to distribute issues off to digitally. But there are absolutely some great platforms out there where it's minimal to no cost to do that, but very very few out there, totally. But yeah, so that's pretty much it, guys. Just wanted to talk about Faun by Moonlight, and yeah. Again, I think some it's absolutely important to have a very bite-sized AI policy. Just want to reiterate that. Typed out an article on this too, which I may cover in the next podcast episode. Just a reminder, separate episode entirely on things that are maybe red flags to submitters, or a turn off to them, or things that you should keep in mind as a founding editor of a lit mag journal, or even submitters should be aware of when submitting to lit mags and journals. To watch out for, right? Before submitting, to keep in mind and to look out for. P.S. guys, so on this podcast, the past couple episodes and stuff, haven't really been trying to push the submission man system on anyone, but I'm just trying to state the benefits of having one. And yeah, totally, some lit magazine journals have saved a lot of money, and been able to apply that to other areas of their publication, you know um, by not having submission man system. On the downside of that, right, when you have when you're managing, right, submissions via email, right, and you're getting, let's say, hundreds or thousands, right, it can be hard to keep track of everything in that sense. And also submitters, right, don't really necessarily know the status, right, through that. When they submit through email, right, there's a lot of question marks for them, right, and they can't like directly message you on their submission, or they can't really do that. And it's challenging. A lot of lit magazine journals, right, today, as I mentioned this podcast multiple times, right, every lit mag journal uses a different intake system. Some use intake forms, some use email, some use a different submission man system. Not everyone's on the same submission system, so it's really challenging nowadays. But I think submission man systems do make submitters' lives easier, and also founding editors. Of course, I'd wish there were like practically zero to no fees on them, or cost monthly payments, or usage fees on them. However, right, to create those, to build them, to maintain them, to keep them up and going, right, there are costs that the founders of those have themselves, to keep things for submission managers up and running themselves. So it's tough. But yeah, I just want to reiterate that, yeah, totally, some lit magazine journals have ran on email for quite some time, till today, but I think it can be quite tough to do that, to have everything just managed through email. It's kind of tough for some. I like having things color coded, tagged, and organized, and just easier for me to have everything structured. That I think, especially if you're going to have a team of some kind, I think it is important to have one to be able to collaborate with others easily, chat with them. It's much harder to do that, I think, just through email, unless you were to hold like maybe weekly meetings or calls with them, or things of that nature. I think it's yeah, it's challenging. That's all I was saying. So Yeah, anyways, yeah, Faun by Moonlight. Again, some of you are aware in the community, right? I, have done a lot of moon themed pieces and stuff like that, or things of that nature, I guess, early years as I was easing back in writing. I haven't written any, nonfiction, long essay pieces of that nature in quite some time myself, or anything historical nature for several years, not several years, or almost nearly little over a decade. I think last time I ever read anything that was rather historical in nature was probably back in high school, probably somewhere between 10th and 12th grade. But I have personally, over the years, even after that, I've always been someone who, again, picked up fact books. I was always someone who loved reading historical bite sized fact books and things like that for fun. Like I have stacks of those till today, even science fact books. So, that's something I always loved reading over the years, and remembering fun facts and, trivia and historical fact shows and stuff like that. I'm all for that. I'm a huge fan of those things too. And yeah, from time to time, over the years, I've watched a lot of movies, right, based on historical events. Absolutely, till this day, I do. And TV series and stuff. A lot of times, some of those ones based on true events, true stories, they introduce us to things that actually happened in time. And obviously they change some details in some of those movies and stuff. They're not 100% accurate to a T, but you absolutely can learn some things from them. And pull things apart. I remember, growing up, sometimes in classes, even we would, be given presented a series in class that was pretty close to some true events, and then we would dissect the series, discuss more about what actually happened and the actual events and things of that nature. So yeah, so that's all, so yeah, that's all I wanted to tack on here. Fawn by Moonlight, check them out. Again, that's fawnbymoonlight.com. They do have, volumes available to purchase. That is, entailed with submission fee as of, you know right, December 2025. I don't know if things will change over time with their structure, in terms of fees and stuff like that, and the issues, and hopefully they have more, samples maybe visible in the future for others, just, those who stop by their website and things of that nature, just maybe one or two pieces more available per each volume, at least, to share more examples from their issues. And I would also just want to tack on one more thing here. So I think in terms of, Fawn by Moonlight, the whole payment aspect, I think it's good also to specify how do you pay others, right? Because there are cases, I think some editors have run into problems like submitters not being able to leverage the same payment system, so I think that is also something to specify. Sometimes, editors give that maybe on a kickback message, right? How in terms of if it's accepted, right, they inform them of that. But I think it's good to tell others in advance, because not everyone, depending on where they're located in the world, right? Some payment systems have location restriction usage and stuff and things of that nature. So that's something else I wanted to point out about, specifying, how others are paid, which system are you using for that, and yeah, that's one thing. And again, in terms of their volumes, their issues, right? I think it's important to also, indicate, how are issues filled? Like, at what point in time does Lit Magazine Journal stop, filling the issue, right? For a lot of poetry magazines, for instance, there's an example. Some places stop at 32 poems, right? Or 14 poems, or, how many pieces are in each issue, across the board? Does it vary? Or are we talking about a certain amount in each issue? Is it consistent, right? Same thing with the page count, right? Is the consistency there? That's just something to take into consideration, I think, when you're creating your lit manga journal, just in general. Some totally publications have varied lengths, things like that. But I think when you are distributing to platforms, distributing issues in print, and you have different sized issues, different things, right? There are some things that become problematic with that, in the sense of, more so, I think this is more so something you run into. Some platforms, they aren't free to use, right? They have upload fees per page cost, which is something to keep in mind. There are absolutely some feed free platforms out there. They take a percentage of maybe the, again, subscription costs, things like that exist, for digital subscription platforms. That's what I'm talking about in that sense. So it helps to think about consistency in general with your lit mag publication, so there's always aware of like, this is how many pieces are in each issue. This is how many are featured. This is, how many are in that section, and it's okay to evolve a publication over time to include maybe artwork at some point in time or other types of calls. I've seen some lit magazine journals start out with, essays and, pieces like that and longer pieces, but also they opened up eventually calls to other things, poetry even, or, artwork and things of that nature, So yeah, of course, then you have to have guidelines fledged out for that. But yeah, you can just tack that on, any new calls in the guidelines FAQ page. Again, yeah, I think it's important nowadays for a lot of lit mags and journals, right, to, have AI policies, and things like that. Again, I think it is just really beneficial to just stick to, a very brief, AI policy, very few sentences like this, nothing, additional, because it can confuse others. Dual trope, I don't know if you guys saw this, but they do have an AI policy. I think I mentioned this in some episode, but an AI policy banner of some kind. Even that, anytime policies changes or things like that very suddenly, or any major changes in structures, I think it's always important to notify any listing places or to address that. Chill subs is one that editors can edit themselves, right? And things like that. So yeah, I think, nowadays, right, a lot of lit magazine journals, they have some sort of AI policy. So just wanted to, go over the guidelines, things I noticed, and just wanted to point out, Faun by Moonlight. And yeah, I hope this helps you. It's really important to make sure you have, clear guidelines and FAQ page. They have an FAQ page, which is great. Just a couple of things that, I mentioned that stood out to me, and elsewhere. I think with Substack, again, a lot of publications have that and use it as additional space, for their publication. I see a lot of lit magazine journals leveraging it for and sharing, additional bonus content, even thoughts from the editor on additional topics, or, challenges they run into their publication, or even better, I think, some additional features of writers, some issues, some Q&As with them, sharing more about, writers who past contributors, some fun things, bonus content. Not necessarily always free, but some have those paywalled, some are free, a mix of content on Substack. I think Substack's really great, seeing publications recommend one another, right? I saw that happen quite a bit in the community with other publications, and I've heard from others that that's how they really, gain subscribers, community recommendations with one another. Totally, other lit magazine journals recommending each other. And it can be hard, growing a publication starting out, nowadays, social media, the whole algorithm thing, it's really hard. I think you really have to, publication in general, just starting out, really interact with the community, other publications, magazine journals, other writers, and things like that. Just in the sense of, something as simple as, I've seen some lit magazine journals share when, the lit mag I run, sharing in the stories, we have an open call, you guys have an open call, let's share together, collectively, that we have calls open, and then others discover your publication like that, the whole community support, sharing one another. I think even, just, uh, interacting with other accounts on social media can help grow. It's a slow process to grow, but you shouldn't focus on, solely social media numbers. They don't at all reflect, publications quality, at all, a following count at all. It's again, piecing everything together, make sure it's consistent, everything, every issue, and to really, I think, in taking when you start out a literary journal, taking in consideration everyone's feedback is so important, to make adjustments, because that's the time to really do it. When you're starting out, you can refine issues going forwards, and over time, especially if you're going to print, you want to make sure things are consistent across the board. So that's it, guys. Faun by Moonlight. So I just wanted to take the time to talk through the guidelines. I think this was a good example of going through guidelines and policies again. And take care, guys. So totally, if you're interested, check out, more of their publication. They have a call window, it looks like. We'll be covering in the next episode, I think, more things on policies, things to watch out as a submitter yourself, or also on a founding editor side, again, of what things maybe submitters don't like to see, and or maybe turned off by, again, and just in general, when you're starting your publication, what to really focus on, and clarify, in terms of, when you're laying things out in terms of guidelines, and yeah, and how to stay safe, in the lit mag world, I think is important as well. So that would be maybe a next episode, just expansion on, policies and things to look out for on sites, when you're reading guidelines and interacting for publication, right, before submitting. So take care, yeah.